Deadman Armaggedon isn't far away now, and for the past month I've been putting years of Deadman experience into one complete guide that covers absolutely everything. This is a game mode where everyone starts on a brand new account, so it's completely fair. You get 10 times the XP you would do normally, including the rewards that you get from quests, plus unique drops such as God War's Dungeon Armor, raid items, the Abyssal Whip and so on have an increased drop chance. As you increase your combat level, this goes up even further, and at combat level 71, your XP multiplier increases to 15 times what you would normally get in the main game. When you start out and every time you reach a new bracket, you'll also receive 1 hour of protection where you can't be killed by other players. Because most of Gilnor is PvP and Deadman, meaning you can attack anyone, but don't worry, if that's not your thing, you can skill in safe zones, you can even train combat in safe zones, and if you're smart, you can boss without worrying about PKs too, which I'll show you how to do later. To add to the risk though, dying in Deadman means you lose everything that you've got with you at the time, but also 80% of the 10 most valuable stacks of items within your bank. It even cancels any offers that you've got on the GE and then puts them into your bank before working out the 10 most valuable stacks. You can't even reduce your risk by giving items to an alt because that's classed as muling and it's against the rules. You do have a safety deposit box though, which can be accessed by the wizard at most banks and the Grand Exchange. He will store 10 items that you can't lose no matter what, even if you die. Now this is 10 items, not 10 stacks of items, so if you had say a stack of 10 sharks for example, that would take up all the room in your safety deposit box. Now if you're here to make bank, the other way you can reduce risk is to sell your things and transfer your money into the normal game mode, which is allowed. You see, players will buy Deadman gold and items for a lot of money, and they pay for any money that you make in Deadman by paying you on 07. For the first hour, they pay you as much as 10,000 times as much as you make in Deadman, so every 1 GP you make, they will pay you 10,000 GP in the main game. Simply going to the stronghold of security and getting your 10,000 GP can make you as much as 10 million GP, but the amount they pay does reduce over time as more money comes into the game. Even still, at the end of day 1, they're usually paying anywhere between 50 and 100 times as much, and even after a week, it's usually about 5 times as much at that point. That does carry a risk because one of you needs to trust trade, and obviously that comes with the usual problems, but there are clans that do this throughout the Deadman mode, and I recommend going into one of their clan chats early just to make sure they're legit and using one of those instead of trust trading a random person. Similar to leagues, in Deadman mode you can also get powerful buffs called sigils. There's a whole bunch of these that give you various benefits like 3 times as many resources when skilling, extra damage, extra accuracy, reduced damage, faster health regeneration and so on. This year there's a few tweaks to the ones last time, as well as a few new ones that they've announced. I'm sure we'll get more as time goes by, but the one that interests me the most so far is the sigil of revoke limitation. Now this allows all revenant weapons to be used outside of the wilderness, but to still give the extra 50% accuracy and damage that they usually give just in the wilderness. You get one of these sigils for free when you first start out in Deadman, along with a starter pack, and you can get another one for free every single day of Deadman from the combat tutors in Lumbridge. The starter pack you get also contains a bow, a staff and a sword, similar to training weapons, only much better. The staff has 500 charges and the bow has 2,000. Now you can just buy sigils on the G from other players, but the other way to get them is to kill things. But if you want to get the most powerful sigils, which are the tier 3 ones, you are realistically going to need to be in bracket 5. That's because they only drop it in brackets 4 and 5, but they're very rare in bracket 4. You typically also have a much higher drop rate for these when you kill things that are over combat level 100. Sigils aren't the only things that you get from killing things, because any creature killed that's not in a safe zone can drop supplies, such as stacks of herbs, potions, runes or food. You can also get emblem drops, which can be traded for various items at the emblem trader at the GE in a safe zone. There's also another place that you can get drops unique to Deadman, which is from breaches. These are bosses that can spawn in various places across Gilnor at set times, and they drop corrupted weapons, which are slightly weaker versions of the usual weapons we have, such as the scythe and the T-bow. This year those weapons are a little bit better than they were last year, and even though they are weaker versions, they're still really popular and in demand, because players only have a few weeks to gear up for the finals, and that's really not a lot of time at all, so there's generally not enough of the best gear to go around. Now all of the breaches are in PvP zones, and whilst most players going to these will be there for the boss drops, if you turn up in expensive gear, you're gonna get targeted. Some of these are also in multi-combat areas, so this is the multi-combat map for old school RuneScape just for reference. Another unique aspect of Deadman is that you can't instantly log out, making PKing much easier. To escape, a player needs to either freeze and log out, get to a safe zone, or teleport if you're not in combat and you're quick enough. That's because if you are in combat, there's a delay before you can teleport away. On the flip side, if you're a PKer, a skilled player can't enter a safe zone, or high level guards will attack you and almost always kill you. Because this is a limited time game mode, we also get automatic quest unlocks. At each combat bracket, some quests will automatically complete, giving you access to any areas, bosses, or items that those quests would usually unlock. Plus, you also get a choice of between 2 quest chains to unlock. Now, these also complete all of the pre-quests needed for that quest, and again, any areas that those quests unlock, items, bosses, and so on. That's all of the rules of Deadman, and you can practice this game mode on World 345, which is the permanent Deadman world, although it is an older version, so there's no breaches, you get PvP protection for a lot longer at the start, and there are a few other small things like the Emblem Trader is in Edgeville, not in a safe zone rather than the GE, but it's a good place to practice and most of it is the same. You can also win real money playing this game, and the prize pool this year is $25,000, which you can get for being the last person alive in the final battle if you choose to do it. This is essentially a Royal Rumble, and fog will descend slowly over time, pushing players into a final location where they all fight to the death, and the last person alive is the ultimate champion, and this is done on 5 different worlds. You can also win money in a different way without PvP by simply scoring points, which you get by killing bosses. This year, those points will be reduced massively by a whopping 90% to any boss after your 75th kill, so you're going to need to change it up quite a lot this year and move from one boss to another if you want to finish high up. It's the small things in Deadman that make a huge difference, and knowing these little tips and tricks can be the difference between being the first to get the best gear and sigils, or struggling to get any gear without running into PK after PK. Try to do this in the order that you're going to use them. So starting out, you can skip the whole of Tutorial Island by simply talking to Skippy right at the start, and he'll also teleport you to one of the following locations: Lumbridge, Varrock, Falador, East Ardey, or the Gnome Stronghold. After you've chose your location, you'll have the usual Tutorial Island supplies in your inventory, but also a starter pack, which includes the choice of combat sigils. But these can only be activated in a safe zone, so be sure to do that before you leave the starter area that you choose, as these are incredibly powerful, especially at the start. Since we all start from scratch, there's nothing in the game and of course nothing on the GE, making the 10,000 GP that you can get just for completing the Stronghold of Security absolutely huge, since shops are the only place you can get things early on. There's a little bit of food in your starter pack, so you can go straight there, plus there's going to be so many players doing it, it's so populated, you're not even likely to get hit by anything. Strategy and time is key at the start of Deadman, and a good plan will give you a huge advantage over others. That usually includes quests if you plan to go to a higher bracket, as these are typically the fastest way to level up, since the XP multiplier that we get, which starts at 10 times the normal XP, also include quest rewards. I will be doing another video on the best possible starting strategy, but just for example, doing the Tree Gnome Village, Grand Tree, Waterfall and Fight Arena takes just over an hour and usually propels you straight into bracket 3. Completing the Tree Gnome Village quest also gives you access to the Spirit Trees that travel around Gillinor, which is massive early on because you can't use minigame teleports in Deadman and there isn't even teleport jewelry for a while. A few other helpful teleports that you can get are using Nigel in the Lumbridge Graveyard, who will give you 1 free teleport per day to the same locations that Skippy gives you. Also, using the Edgeville teleport lever twice will take you over to Ardey. And of course, you could use charter ships to get around, but at the start when we don't have much money, they are extremely expensive. So a couple of ships that can get you around for just 30 GP is the one from Port Sarim over to Moosa Point, and you can move between 3 areas, which is Rimington, Brimhaven and Ardey for just 30 GP too. If you progress quickly in Deadman, getting PK becomes less of a problem, because it's impossible for someone to level up just as fast as you, as well as making the money, getting the supplies and weapons and so on to actually start killing people. Things are extremely expensive at the start relative to the money we have. Dragon Bones are typically 3,000 to 5,000 each. The first power amulets will probably be about 50,000 GP too, and even basic food is quite expensive, as everyone needs it but no one's actually farming it. For that reason, try to plan to be self-sufficient. Almost everything on the G for the first day will be massively overpriced, that's if it's even on the G at all. You can scrape by from shops, the stock replenishes much faster than usual, so there is enough for everyone. Plus you can get a bone crossbow and bolts from Lowe's archery shop in Varrock, and some leather just north of and by the anvils. For magic, you can get a basic staff from Zaf in Varrock. We have access to runes in the Varrock rune shop. The Wilderness Mage Arena Bank, you can get higher level runes like Law, Death, Nature and Cosmic. Plus Betty's rune shop in Port Sarim has a very basic wizard's hat. It's not the best, but it's very cheap and it gives you +2 magic. The Amulet of Magic will be on the G usually after about an hour, but again, it will be very expensive. For melee, your starter sword is the equivalent of a mithril scimitar, but you can equip it at any level. You can also get a rune scimitar from the Zamorak Warriors, which is a 1 in 50 drop. They're very easy to kill with magic and can be safe spotted, but it is a very highly populated area with a lot of competition. You can then get plate legs and plate skirts up to Adi and Al-Kharid, plate bodies up to Mithril and Varrock, and a helm at the Barbarian Village which goes up to Adi. This year, Chivalry will be automatically unlocked too once you've got the prayer level. Also, when you reach bracket 2, a lot of the Recipe for Disaster mini quests will be automatically completed, so you can get gloves from the chest in the Lumbridge basement up to, I think it's Adi, possibly Rune, looking at the quest that they give us, which is a great all-round item. I'm going to be doing a few videos on how to make money in Deadman, but having at least one good money maker is really important. People overprice everything, and without it, you'll likely have to run across half of Gilnot every time you need a new item that could have just been bought in the GE for 10k. Sure, it's a complete rip-off, but it's just well worth paying for the time saved and the fact that you don't have to go into a PvP zone to get it. The site getracker.com also has a Deadman mode feature during a tournament, which you access by sliding a bar at the top left. This is amazing for knowing the exact price that items are selling for, because the GE is very rarely accurate when it comes to the price in Deadman. I'll put a link below to that site so you can access it whenever you want. Next, don't just use your safety deposit box to store your best items. I also use mine as like a reserve cash pot. No matter how good you are or how careful you are, death is always a possibility in Deadman. So only keep what you need in your bank and sell the rest, then invest that money in something worth a good amount that's quite stable in price. Whenever I get a decent drop or have been on a trip where I've made a bit of money, I usually sell everything and then buy a few dragon items and put them in a deposit box. That way, if I die, I can just take 1 or 2 out, sell them on the G, and then quickly buy another set of Black D Hard, Rune Crossbow and Glory, or whatever I'm using, and then go straight back to what I was doing. Doing that method means deaths are just a small inconvenience. There's a delay when logging out in Deadman, and a delay when teleporting if you're in combat. But if you're safe spotting something, meaning it can't hit you back, you're not classed as being in combat, so you can instantly teleport and it'll save you getting into a lot of fights that you don't want to. There's a few decent combat training areas and safe zones too. You can kill the guards in Varrock, the Terrorbirds in the Gnome Stronghold, but by far the best is the Warriors Guild, which is a safe zone in Deadman Armaggedon, although that was a recent change and it's not a safe zone in World 345. If you're a PKer, teleport locations can be one of the greatest places to catch players far away from a bank. For everyone else though, anytime you have to teleport to a PvP area, use the RuneLight plugin called Player Indicators and make sure Player Indicator for other players is enabled. Have your mouse ready over a teleport, and if you see a red nameplate on your minimap as you teleport in, instantly teleport away. Alternatively, take a different route to a location. I would personally rather run from Falador to the Warriors Guild pretty much risk-free than use the game's necklace knowing a PK will almost certainly be there. Also, be very careful in safe zones, as things like rooftop agility courses are not actually safe areas even though they are within a safe zone. In fact, anytime you go up or down a level within a safe zone, check this icon here just to make sure that it is still classed as safe. Doing quests can give you access to areas that most players don't, which can be a great method for farming supplies or training in peace until you're ready to fight yourself. This is a map where everything in green can only be either accessed by completing quests or until you reach the bracket number that I've put on each green area, where it will then be open to everyone, or at least everyone that chooses one of the quest chains. This map also doesn't include a few things like underground or unusual locations such as Xanaris and Dorgish Khan. Sigils are absolutely massive, and I found last time that people didn't realise how good some of them were for at least a few days. So if you can work out the best ones early in advance and snag them on the GE, you can often get them a lot cheaper. There's too many of these to go through on one video, but I'll be doing another with all the best combinations soon. If you plan to go bossing in Deadman, focus on the ones that drop good PvP gear, as PBM gear is generally worth very little. For example, the Chambers of Xeric is far better money than the Tombs of Amasket in this game mode. Any raid though is a hotspot for PKs, and there's usually a max one at the entrance to all of them once players have had the time to gear up. Other hotspots include almost every Slayer task location, teleport spots as I mentioned earlier, the agility pyramid, common quest areas apart from the first few hours usually have PKs, the best skilling locations, barrows, and the usual wilderness hotspots. AFK training in Deadman is quite difficult. You can still obviously splash in a safe zone for mage training, but to train range and melee you can't simply go to rock crabs anymore, as eventually a PK is just going to show up. So a couple of tricks that I did last time was to complete the Depths of Despair quest, which means you can access the Crabclaw Caves here, and there's more rock crabs but generally not many PKs. The other place I went to was Swamp Crabs. When I did the Mauritania quest chain to access Firewatch, I only seen one other player in 2 days in the whole area. It was completely dead. So while Swamp Crabs here do have slightly higher stats, they've still got very low defense, so you still get a lot of XP. There's some huge changes to sigils this year and some new combinations that I think are going to be massively OP, especially for magic. There's some brand new ones too, but first the changes to last year's ones that are going to have a huge impact this year. Starting off in skilling, it was amazing money to mine all last Deadman, and you could do it from anywhere on the map, because the sigil of remote storage sent everything that you gathered straight to the bank, from mining, woodcutting, fishing and farming. That in itself was OP enough, but you can have 3 sigils active at any time, so when you added in the mining sigil of the Infernal Smith, it turned any ore into the equivalent bar, plus the sigil of Enhanced Harvest, which gives you 5 times the normal amount of resources, so every single ore that you mined sent 5 bars directly to your bank. It even got better because the sigil of the Alchemaniac gave 30% more GP from a high alching, so the price of bars went up as well. Understandably, this year they've reduced the amount of resources that you get from the sigil of Enhanced Harvest from 5 times as much down to 3 times as much. But everything else is the same, making this still one of the best ways to make absolute bank this year in order to easily buy out those dragon bones, gear, supplies, whatever you need, or just to make a lot of money on 07. This time, however, expect there to be a lot more competition. It's a very well-known method now from the last Deadman, and there's probably going to be a ton of PKs trying to kill people doing it. This year, the award for the most overpowered sigil for PVM goes to the Sigil of the Menacing Mage. Overall, they've generally tried to buff most combat and utility sigils, but nerf the skilling ones. And this one sigil, which we got for free last time, so I presume we're going to get again this time, is way OP in my opinion. It's always been good, but this year it has a 20% chance to inflict 18 damage over 6 seconds, instead of 12 that it was last year. But the biggest effect the sigil has is it also heals you for the same amount of damage, giving rise to a brand new tactic. You see, that heals an average of 3.6 health every single attack, so even on a 5-tick mage weapon, it's going to work out at more than 1 health per second that you regain just from this one sigil. That also does a ton of damage. Add in something like the Sigil of Arcane Swiftness, which reduces any mage weapon by 1 tick that's over 4 ticks normally, and you attack faster, you proc faster, and you heal much faster too. The third sigil, which you can add into this combo, depends on what you're going to be doing. A PK could add in the brand new tier 3 one called Rampart, which increases all of your melee and ranged defensive stats by 100, although it doesn't affect your mage. Catching anyone far away from a safe zone with this setup would surely allow you to outlast them in any fight. Well, apart from rangers, which probably have the most OP sigil in PvP this year. This setup is also going to be amazing for how long you can last at any bosses, and right now I think there's a huge potential to stay at certain bosses indefinitely. I can't test it obviously, but I would imagine you're going to out-heal the damage from a lot of the older bosses that tend to have lower accuracy. That extra 100 to defensive stats will significantly reduce the damage you take, and Menacing Mage Sigil will keep topping up your health. Even for the newer, more accurate bosses that very rarely miss, you can change that last sigil for a new tier 2 called Restoration. Similar to Soul Split back in the day, this is going to heal you for 10% of any damage that you do rounded up. Now at high levels with decent gear and a 4-tick mage weapon, these 2 sigils will be healing you for about 2.5 health per second. Alternatively, for another sigil that you can use in this kind of setup is the Sigil of Titanium, which reduces the damage you take by a flat rate of 60%. Very few bosses can do more damage than any of these kind of combinations of sigils can stop or heal you back up for, unless you're making a ton of mistakes. But where I think this last sigil can be extremely abused is that Vorkath, combined with two different ones. You see, Vorkath is one of the few bosses in Deadman that's instant, and you can fight it as many times as you like without having to leave, as long as you don't run out of supplies. So, as long as you can get to the instance safely, which is pretty easy since this is the only bit that is PvP enabled, you're never going to have to worry about PKs. You'll be able to farm sigils, and a lot of the items are alchables, so if loads of people do it, it can't even crash in price. I would imagine the sigil of restoration is going to be more than enough healing, as long as you're doing plenty of damage. So the last two sigils just need to increase your DPS as much as possible. What you go with really depends on your weapon. For range, if you can get a crossbow or obviously a web weaver bow, and then use the sigil of revoke limitation, all revenant weapons also get a 50% damage boost outside of the wilderness in PvM. The final one you choose will probably depend on how often you're hitting. If you're hitting quite a few zeros, Meticulousness gives you a 75% extra accuracy boost, but if you're hitting almost all of the time, the damage from Ruthless Ranger has been increased to 15 this time, up from 5 the last Deadman. For Crossbow, which is a 3-tick weapon, you're going to get a lot of procs from this. Slow melee weapons like the Dragon Hunterlands or VLS, which I would imagine will absolutely own here, you're going to want the 1-tick faster attacking sigil. This year it's been changed slightly and every combat style has their own version of it, and the melee one's called Swashbuckler. Add into that the sigil of the Formidable Fighter, another one from last year that was already very powerful and is being buffed as well, up to 10 damage. This is probably going to be the staple setup, not just for Vorkath, I just think Vorkath is the most abusable, but for any bossing that you're doing. And if you can manage any of those bosses without heals, you can switch out the bottom one for another one that does even more damage. And the only real downside that I can see is that you're not going to be able to pick up the lower value loot like the hides and the dragon bones. Crossbows are possible too, but restoration doesn't heal special attacks such as the Ruby Bolt's proc, so you might struggle to do enough damage to heal up. For low level PvP, using knives with the Ruthless Ranger was OP as hell last time, and it just got 3 times more powerful, and that amount is doubled again if your opponent has no run energy. Plus it also drains 30 run energy when it procs, so it's not going to take long at all before they don't have any. And this is all before you add in any other sigils to that one. In bracket 1, if you get your range up, go out with just some bronze knives, a dart, and attack players, the proc alone is going to get you a ton of kills. Add in another 2 sigils and better knives, and if you plan to stay in bracket 1 or 2 this year and do pretty much anything other than PK or stand in a safe zone, you might want to rethink it because proc damage from just this sigil is 1.25 damage per second if you have run energy, and you very quickly won't, which then goes up to 2.5. If a PK is on you and hit most of the time, you're just going to be constantly eating, and that's before you factor in that's just the average damage. If you get 2 or 3 procs quickly, it's going to be almost impossible to survive. The only saving grace that I can see for this one is that the procs are only on successful hits. Defending against it, you could use the Sigil of Porcupine, which recoils 4 damage every time that you take damage, or Rampart for plus 100 range defense. But equally, a PK can add the Rigorous Ranger for plus 20 accuracy, or even a Blowpipe or a Crossbow if they're in the wilderness. All that, and that is before we factor in that the player being attacked is walking at this point, and the PK has not even used a special attack yet. Good players will adapt, I've no doubt, but I got a feeling this might suck the fun out of it for a lot of the less experienced players. For leveling up combat, sigils are far more straightforward, and you're going to want to always use these sigils based on your combat style. All of the top ones here have been buffed this year, including melee, which now has a 20% chance to hit an extra 10 damage on your next attack. Since these only proc on a successful hit, using them alongside the accuracy sigils that you can get seems like the best approach. There's 3 tiers of accuracy this time to all combat styles. Death Strikes is going to give you 20%, Precision is 50%, and the new Meticulous one is 75%. So, depending on what you can get your hands on, especially early on, pick the best one of those that you can. Even though the XP is the same, leveling up this time is going to be a little bit quicker, especially early on, and the faster hitting weapons the better because of the buffs that these have had. So for range, the Bone Crossbow, which you can get from Lowe's Archery Shop in Varric, no quest required to access it, requires just 28 range and will be a very good training weapon because it's a 3-tick weapon and it will proc every 18 seconds on average. Those are what I think is going to be the most powerful sigil setups this year, but there's also a few individual sigils that are worth a special mention. Sigil of Stamina is unchanged this year and is as useful as it always is, putting you under the permanent effect of Stamina Potion. Plus it's only tier 1, so they'll be out quite quickly, and it can be a huge advantage early on when we've got low agility and no teleports. The Sigil of Devotion automatically buries bones for double prayer XP, because getting prayer XP in Deadman absolutely sucks. Ideally you want to get it early, get it within your 1 hour time of protection, or you run the Chaos Altar in a PK hotspot during the biggest PvP event of the year. Last Recall is nerfed this year, but for most users like returning to a boss, it won't have any impact at all, and it will teleport you back to the last place you were when you teleported away. The Sigil of the Augmented Thrall does 5 times the damage now from your thralls, giving them a max hit of 15 every 4 ticks, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that actually outperforms some of the major sigils that I've already mentioned within this guide. Finally is the new one, which gives you 2 times your agility level while running every 10 ticks, but not when you're in a safe zone. It is very niche because you naturally try to do as much as you can in a safe zone apart from PKing, but if that doesn't stack with the multiplier, and I presume it won't, you'll get 20 XP per minute that you're running per agility level that you are. So at level 1 agility it's 20 XP per minute, level 2 is 40 XP per minute, and level 3 is 60 XP, and so on. It would take you just over 2 hours of running to get from level 1 to level 50. 50 to 75 would be a further 40.5 hours, and level 75 to 99, 112 hours roughly. Of course you don't have to go that high, but if you could manage to fit it in anywhere, being in the Rev Caves on day 2 and being able to use the agility shortcuts would be absolutely massive for one of the best money makers in Deadman. For some of these methods you're going to need some starter GP, and there are a couple of quick ways to get it. The obvious one, the Stronghold of Security, will give you 10,000 GP for looting the chest on the 3rd level. Or if you complete the Waterfall quest, it takes about 10 minutes time and you get 2 diamonds plus 40 mithril seeds, and those can be sold to a general store for about 5 or 6,000 GP. Last year, and we've had nothing to say it's going to be any different this year, we also got 5,000 GP in our starter pack, so hopefully that's going to be the same too. There's nothing clever about the first one at all, but it's likely to make you between 50 and 100,000 GP in the first hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but is actually massive at the start of Deadman. When you start out, talk to Skippy straight off Tutorial Island and ask to be teleported to Ardoin. Then open your starter pack and choose the Mage Sigil, equip it alongside the Mage Staff, and then bank everything else except a little bit of food. From there, just head west to the lever and pull it to go to high level Wilderness. Be careful going east past the Hellhounds from here and head down to the Lava Dragons. You have to be a little bit careful when you're getting them into position, but every single one of these can be safe spotted and they are extremely weak to magic, even at level 1. But with 10 times the XP you normally get, you're going to level really quickly as well. The starter staff has 500 casts, which is pretty decent and enough for quite a lot of kills over here, and the mage bag isn't too far away if you want to top yourself up and buy some more runes. These have a decent amount of Addy and Rune items, plus Lava Dragon Bones even in the first half an hour usually sell for 1 to 2,000 each, and then much higher later on. I've been here the last 2 tournaments and it's quite busy, but not so busy where you can't usually get one to yourself. But if you are worried about too many players doing this, you can also go and kill blue dragons over in the Isle of Souls dungeon through the Edgeville portal. Alternatively, if you're looking to level up range this Deadman instead of mage, you can also kill green dragons, which are far weaker to range in the wilderness. The next one is a little bit of a gamble, but if you can snag yourself the Sigil of Agile Fortune off the GE, you're going to make over 100,000 GP per hour. It's tier 1, so it should come into the game pretty quickly, but then it depends on who's willing to pay the most. Every single marker grace that spawns will be accompanied by 10,000 GP, and the reason you want to do this instead of just the agility pyramid is because the pyramid is a PK hotspot. It's not a safe zone either, and by the time you have the level for it, PKs have already geared up and they're going to be waiting for you. However, on many rooftop courses, although they aren't safe zones themselves, the PKs can't access them without the agility level to PK you. So, as long as the starter location is in a safe zone, like Varrock or Falador, they can't do anything about it. If you want something completely safe, a way to earn money in a safe zone is just to get level 20 thieving and go to Ardy, which means you can then steal silks from this stall here, and then the owner of the silk stall a little bit to the south will then buy them off you for 60 GP each, as long as you haven't stolen any silks and have been outside Ardy for at least 10 minutes since you last stole any. This one's not the best money maker, but it is completely safe and will make you 36,000 GP per hour Goblin Diplomacy and Rune Mysteries are auto-completed in Deadman, so if you've rushed 17 Mining, 23 Agility and 23 Thieving, then go and do the Lost Tribe quest and Death to the Dogashian, you will have access to an amazing early moneymaker. Jewelry is like gold dust at the start of Deadman. No one has any, but to be able to wear just a power amulet this early on would be massive, or even having access to a bunch of teleports like the ones from the Games Necklace or the Ring of Dueling. Considering we're all really poor at this point, the demand is so high for these things that they have a high price, and doing these two quests gives you access to the ham storerooms. Each of these chests either give you gold or jewelry up to diamond. And I think last year I paid something like 50,000 GP for an early amulet of power, and to show how rare they are, someone even said nice amulet to me. I mean, when's anyone ever said that about an amulet of power before? There are two issues with this though. You either need to level your magic up to be able to enchant them, put them on the G for much less, or team up with someone else that levels their mage whilst you're doing the quest, and then just split the profit between you. The other issue with this one is stealing the ham clothing for this quest does suck and takes quite a long time, but I would imagine you can complete both quests in about an hour, and then once you're in the ham storerooms, no one else can come in that doesn't have those requirements, so you're not likely to get PKs in there because they won't have had the time to gear up yet. Surprisingly, fishing is actually quite a good early money maker on the first day of Deadman, just because 99% of players are training combat and they all need food. Salmon was selling for 500 GP each at the start of last Deadman, but the downside is fishing and cooking's only really good money for the first day, and then we start getting unique drops with high level food, and OP sigils mean we use a lot less of it. Add into this one the Sigil of Storage, a tier 1 sigil that banks 90% of anything that you gather, and the Sigil of Enhanced Harvest, giving you triple resources this year, and you'll be printing money on day 1. Plus, you can do this in the Gnome Stronghold, which is a completely safe zone. This next method is very risky, so realistically you want to set this up to do in your 1 hour of protection, but it's really good money if you do. Ideally, try to use your first hour of protection to get yourself 35 fishing, and you can do this either by getting 20 fishing normally, then going to Varric Museum and getting a free lamp from the Historian, because we automatically complete one of the quests he rewards you for, and this will give you 10,000 XP in any skill over 20. Using that on fishing will then take you up to level 30, and then you just need to fish the last 5 levels. Another way you can do it is to get 35 making, which is much faster skill than fishing, and then do the Sea Slug quest, because that reward will instantly get you from level 1 fishing all the way up to level 46. You then want to work on getting yourself into the second bracket for another hour of protection, which you can do quite quickly through the starting quest, and I'll have a starting strategy on how to do that a little bit closer to the start of Deadman. It does seem a lot for just 1 hour of Temporos, but with the Sigil of Hoarding you gain triple loot from here, as well as Wintertodt and the Guardians of the Rift. You could do the same strategy for the other two as well, but I think Temporos is just the better choice, because all the items that you need to do it you can get for free on the boat, and you don't have to loot your rewards from the pool until it's safe to do so, which means you could in theory do it outside of PvP protection too. The best possible moneymaker in all of Deadman on day 1 is also by far the riskiest. To get into the Rev Caves cost 100,000 GP, which will be worth anything from 20 million to 100 million 07 GP at the start to buy that kind of money, because people exchange GP from one game mode to the other, and it starts off at a rate of 10,000 to 1. Now, I've got to confess, I've never actually done this method, even though I've been tempted many times, but I've spoken to a few people that have done it, and what I've been told is it's not actually as busy as you'd think, and most players are too busy making bank themselves to worry about anyone else. That being said, I would imagine if you look like a free meal, there's going to be someone there to take a bite. The biggest risks though typically come with the biggest rewards, and revs are typically over 1 million GP per hour even at a low level. That kind of money will give you a fantastic start to Deadman and allow you to buy all the things that you need, or you could even trade it over for 07 money to make absolute bank on there. There are plenty of ways that you can AFK and make money on multiple accounts, but the only real difficult part is setting up the method in the first place. The easiest one is probably rune crafting using 2 sigils, the Sigil of the Abyss, which is being nerfed this year, sadly, but will still give you 5 times as many runes when rune crafting, paired up with another one, the Last Recall Sigil, that teleports you back to the last place which you've just teleported away from. Simply, that means you can teleport directly to any rune crafting altar and create 5 times as many runes as usual every 5 minutes. Then, just wait out the time and simply repeat it. The next one is incredibly simple and can be done AFK, but you're going to be one of the most hunted players in the whole of Deadman. The sigil of remote storage sends everything that you gather directly to the bank. Enhanced harvest will give you triple the amount of resources that you'd normally get. And finally, the woodcraft sigil will turn logs straight into planks, providing that you're not in a safe zone and you have enough GP to pay for them, but at a reduced rate. So in effect, every log that you chop will send 3 planks directly to the bank, but it's very risky holding a large stack of cash in your inventory in a PvP area, but there's a couple of things that you can do to reduce the risk. There are hundreds of oak trees within the games. Simply just find one that is very out the way, where few players go, and even ideally if you can find one that's blocking the path of where players are likely to come from, it'll just help you to teleport away if anyone actually tries to attack you. The next option is to complete quest chains that give you access to areas that otherwise players don't have, such as the Legends quest, which gives you access to the Karazi jungle and 3 mahogany trees. Every bracket you unlock automatically completes a bunch of quests, many of which are needed for other quests. So it's going to take a seriously dedicated PK to do all of the quests just to try and kill you, especially if you're completing the Legends quest in just bracket 1 or bracket 2. Plus, you'll have a full inventory of food anyway, since the planks are sent directly to your bank, and you could either just train magic so you can entangle them and log out, or even use the Karazi jungle itself, which is quite difficult to get through, just to line of sight them and escape that way. This was a similar strategy to one I'd done last year, and you can do it this time as well, where I used the automatic banking sigil with triple resources, but I added the sigil of the Infernal Smith, which instead of making planks, smelts ores into bars. Sadly this year it's only got a 20% chance of doing it, but even still that's still going to be really good money. All I did was I done the underground pass last time in bracket 1 in order to access the 2 rune rocks in the Elven Lands. Now that quest automatically completes in bracket 2, so very few people thought, I know, I'll do this in bracket 1. Obviously it doesn't make a lot of sense, but by having a plan like this, it means you're doing something completely different to everyone else, and you generally find that you're on your own. This one spot alone I had by myself for a couple of days, and it made me 400 million GP. It was by far the best method that I did last time. This next one is really insane, because you can do it whilst being stood at the G in a completely safe zone. The sigil of the Alchemaniac will give you 30% more GP when high alching, so it's just as simple as putting offers in the G for common items and then alching them for a profit. There's a lot of competition with this, so the trick really is just to know what to buy. Early on, rune's going to be too expensive because everyone wants it, so you better start with lower items like steel, mithril, maybe addy depending on demand, plus anything you can think of that will be quite common early on because the G is usually dead for a few days too. Simple things like Onyx Bolt tips that Lava Dragons drop will help you make enough money to get a decent cash stack before the competition so you can buy alchables that they can't afford. Another safe method that you could do is to do what Flipping Old School did last time when he made 100 million GP, I think that was just in one day, just by buying out sigils really cheaply and then putting them back on the G for a much higher price. Players really don't want to be stood at the G in this game mode, wasting time, so they're just going to put a big offer in to buy sigils so they can get it and move on, so there's a lot of money to be made. Plus, if you can work out what ones are likely to be more in demand later on and work that out early, you're going to make a ton of money. I also recommend the site gtracker.com to check the prices of all Deadman items when the game mode is out, which is just going to give you a bit more of an advantage. Crafting is one of the best money makers in all of Deadman, and a good team of 3 or 4 players will probably make bank working together and getting to rank 1. It's good money just having a high crafting, but to be one of the first to make each item is just absolutely massive. The first D'hide, Glories, Furies, Zenite Jewelry, and so on will be bought out by the richest players in the game for tons of money. The hard part with this one is really beating others to it. That's why I recommend the team to do this. Because to get first, you're probably going to need one person making or swapping money, another buying crafting supplies, probably from charter ships, which is quite quick and easy to do, and then another 1 or 2 players making the molten glass and then one crafting it. That's probably the fastest method I can think of for this one for you to get up to D'hide and diamond jewelry really quickly. However, they are increasing the respawn rate of some shops this time, and they haven't said how, so there is a little chance that they could do the same method they've done in leagues, where you can essentially buy as many items from a shop as you want, and if that is the case, you could in theory buy uncut gems from any gem store and then put them and sell them back. This one doesn't just apply to quest items, but those tend to do really well. If you need an item in Deadman, you're almost always going to massively overpay for it, it's just how it is. Unlike the main game, there isn't many things on the GE, and people won't be wasting GE slots selling toad's legs, split logs, or cake tins for example, well, unless someone's likely to pay a lot for it. People do tend to pay a lot though, because the choice is simply spend 5 minutes in a PvP zone getting one item, risking your entire bank, or pay 10,000 GP on the GE for one. When you think about it, it's not even a difficult decision, even though you know you're being completely ripped off. So the hardest part for this method is finding the items that you can sell for a decent amount at inflated prices that are going to sell fairly quickly. A few that I've done myself that did work: I completed the medium Kiram Jadari to access the underground gem mine, and made burning amulets in world 345, which is the permanent Deadman world, and they all sold for 10,000 GP each. I also made bullseye lanterns, very simple, but they all sold for 10,000 GP each too. Other things that could work but I've never tried, I would imagine snakeskin boots early on when we don't have access to D-hide would sell pretty well. Again, any quest items needed in quests that don't automatically complete generally do well too, and any items that are likely to be in demand but are quite difficult to obtain. If you love doing clue scrolls, you can make a lot of money here too, and because of all the different locations that you can go to, it's very hard for people to know where to PK you. The Sigil of the Bloodhound gives you a 75% chance to get the reward casket after each step. The Fortune Farmer makes all clues stackable, and Treasure Hunter will give you 3 times as many clues as normal. The main thing to worry about with this one, I think, is probably the teleport locations, because PKs camp a lot of them, so you're going to have to be smart about how you get around the map. That being said, what do you really risk doing clues anyway? Not much at all, and you can sell any decent loot you get straight away, swap the money to the main game, so you're not risking your drops either. Farming has some really good sigils that not only help you make money, but also to level up quickly too. Enhanced Harvest gives you triple resources when farming. The Sigil of Nature lets you choose your own farming contract, plus things grow 5 times faster, and remote storage again will automatically bank everything that you gather. Getting into the Farming Guild will make you safe from almost every PK, whilst giving you access to pretty much every type of farming patch. Even if a PK does come, you're likely to be very high level in farming if you're doing this method for money, and then you can escape by going to the northern part, which requires 85 farming to access. You are though going to have to work out which items are profitable, because the supply drops we get in Deadman include things like super combat potions, and the herb prices are just a lot different to the normal game. Another method that I did last time was to complete all the quests to access Darkmare in bracket 2. The boss is fairly difficult at that level, but even in bracket 3 this will be perfectly doable if you're not that comfortable with PvM. I did it to kill a Firewatch, but this year I'd say it's probably better just to pickpocket them because of the new Sigil of Deception that automatically repockets for you until you fail. Plus, you're not risking anything at all when you pickpocket, and if you get a Bloodshot, again, you just sell it on the G, swap your money to 07 and carry on without any risk. In the exact same area, you could do the Hallowed Sepulchre. Unfortunately, the Ring of Endurance won't be worth much in Deadman because the Sigil of Stamina, which permanently puts us under the effects of a stamina potion, but in good usable or alchable items, it's still about 1 mil per hour, which will be decent for the first couple of days at least, when people are exchanging 07 GP for, at least 10 times the amount of Deadman GP at that point. Effectively making this at least 10 million GP per hour in a spot I just don't see PKs going to. The most profitable, but by far the riskiest, is gonna be hunting chins. The Sigil of the Hunter gives you 3 times as many chins as usual, so that is likely to be over 10,000 GP every time you catch one, and it's only going to take you an hour or 2 to get the level. So you could in theory do that whilst exchange rates are pretty insane and be making an absolute fortune, but it will be a massive PK hotspot. For that reason, as painful as it might sound, when you have access to such a good moneymaker, I would complete the Song of the Elves, which requires level 70 in all of these skills, and it will probably take you a day or 2 to do. But you would have access to Red Chinning Spot here, and the chance of anyone being here to PK you is extremely slim due to all those requirements. In fact, the last time I found the bigger problem in these methods that I did, where I found these remote areas, was the fact that eventually other PVMs or skillers come along, and then there's not enough resources for everyone. Then suddenly the skillers turn to the dark side, and start PKing each other. A few things to be aware of though: when entering a lot of instance areas, like house portals and some bosses, there is a countdown before you can go into some of them like this. Also, whilst you can bank during a fight and take out some more supplies, such as the chest outside the Chambers of Zarek, there's a delay after you exit the bank tab for a few seconds before you can eat anything or drink a brew. Finally this year, the PJ timers are changing to a flat 20 seconds for both parties, whether you're the person attacking or defending, but they're bringing back the Sigil of Freedom. This one breaks you free from any bind effects whatsoever, but the Sigil gets used up in the process. So this Deadman, if a PK catches you somewhere, you're pretty much going to have to entangle them and then line of sight them, then they're going to break through using the Sigil, and then you're going to have to do it again before you can finally teleport away. Don't worry though, even if you can't do that, there are some simple ways to boss without having to worry about PKs. So the first tactic you could do is to simply rush the top brackets. Of course, if you can put the time in, this is going to give you at least a few days at most content in the top brackets early on without having to worry about any PKs. Because whilst you only have to train at 1 or 2 stats to kill the boss of your choice and get 1 set of gear, PKs generally have to train at least 2 stats and get the gear in those 2 combat styles to have any realistic chance of killing you. So it does take them much longer. Another method that you can do is to open up bosses that you can only access with a lot of requirements, and there's a few sigils this year that mean you never need to leave a boss area. For example, a boss such as Ziliana in God War's Dungeon, which has only 1 requirement of 70 agility, but the one thing PVMers and PvPers have in common is we all absolutely hate agility. There's even a new sigil that will train agility for you whilst you're out of a safe zone. That's probably going to get you that requirement, or certainly close to it, at least by the time you've trained up all your stats. This one's probably going to be one of the last bosses PKs start to show up at, plus you don't need good gear, and the sigils that we have this time mean you can stay as long as you want. The Sigil of Stamina always puts you under the effects of a stamina potion, which will save you having to bring those potions. Restoration will heal you for more than the damage that you're going to receive, and then just add in one of the DPS sigils such as Thralls, which makes kills much faster. Or instead, if you prefer, you can use Last Recall to allow you to keep teleporting back straight outside of any boss, and then take 2 other sigils that increase your damage. For teams, I would imagine 3 or more in Black D'hide with Rune Crossbows and Ruby Bolts could farm next without risking too much at all. The drops here are good for PvP and PvM, so are going to be worth a lot. And again, the Sigil of Restoration will be healing you throughout the fight, paired with Titanium, which reduces damage by 60% in PvM. And then you can just add in Thralls again, or Swashbuckler, which increases the speed of your Rune Crossbow attacks by 1 tick, or even just simply Ruthless Ranger that does extra range damage, and the boss is going to be very easy to farm, even with a small team and budget gear. The requirements of 70 hit points, range, strength, and agility mean most players can't come here, and no one in the right mind is going to be leveling up those stats just to try and kill people in Black D'hide. Since you don't lose any active sigils on death, your only real risk at Ziliana or next is going to be about 100 to 150,000 GP. The drops from these bosses will very quickly pay for you to put 10 Dragon Plate legs in your safety deposit box, which you always keep no matter what, even if you die. Every single one of those can then be sold for about 160,000 GP anytime you want, so if you do die, you can pull one of those out and gear straight back up in about 2 minutes, and then you're ready to go again. However, whilst God War's Dungeon bosses are very good in many ways, the bosses don't do too much damage, the drops are good for PvP, again, so they're worth a lot. It does have one major downside though, that it is multi-combat, and if a clan decides to lock down this area, you can possibly never ever go back. So a method with less potential, but much safer to do, is to do large quest chains that are required to access certain bosses. Now, some of these do auto-unlock at certain brackets. Dragon Slayer 2 unlocks in the 5th bracket if you pick the Dragonkin storyline. So if you decide to complete that quest chain in bracket 4 or earlier, you're going to be one of a very small amount of players that will have access to Rune Dragons or Vorkath. Song of the Elves never auto-complete, so doing the quest in any bracket will give you access to the Gauntlet and Zolcano too. Plus, you don't need any items for the Gauntlet once it's unlocked, so even if you die, you can just run back and go again. You don't even need to loot the chest if there's a PK about, and if any PK actually bothers to do the Song of the Elves with all of those requirements to kill people with practically no risk, then... What? The only problem with this strategy is it takes a couple of days to do the quest and get all the requirements. So by that time the exchange rate's usually between about 10 and 15 to 1, roughly it changes every year, meaning every million you make in Deadman, people will buy it off you for between 10 and 15 million GP. That's still going to be amazing money for the first few days at these bosses, but by the end of the first week the exchange rate will have dropped from about 1.5 million 07 GP for every 1 million of Deadman that you make, and then these bosses just aren't that great anymore. Unlike Nex or the other God Wars dungeon bosses, where even if the exchange rate drops, people will still massively overpay for things like Torva or a Zarya crossbow, these bosses tend to drop a lot of supplies and alcohols instead, so once the exchange rate drops, it really hits them much harder. You can also do this with the Phantom Musket, but the Venator Bow is a PVM weapon, so the main drop here doesn't sell for much money. And also the Desert Treasure 2 bosses, but they only get a 2x multiplier on uniques this year, no matter what bracket you're in. Even though they might not be the best money, there is a massive advantage to doing Warcraft, the Desert Treasure 2 bosses, or the Phantom Musket this year, and that is because the bosses that are in an instance, and with the new Sigil of Restoration plus the Sigil of Titanium, you can stay at any single one of these bosses for up to 6 hours until you get nerdlogged, and not a single PK can touch you. Some bosses are also very difficult to PK at. If you're comfortable with PvP, a very safe place that you can go early on is Barrows because of all the ways that you've got to escape. There's going to be PKs here without doubt, but it's almost impossible to get a kill against anyone that knows what they're doing. Each hill with the bosses in is so close together when you're outside that you only really need to tank one freeze before you can go inside any of these mounds and escape by either going up the stairs and digging until you're out of combat for long enough time to tally, or by freezing your opponents and then just running around the other side of the sarcophagus. Inside, it's even harder to PK anyone. The layout is different for every single player. In Deadman mode, sometimes the doors jam too, allowing players to easily gap the other player, and there's a ton of creatures in the way too, which are going to put both of you into combat. Now, Barrow's gear is not going to make you billions, but it is a good money maker for the first few days, and at least you're leveling stats at the same time too. For the really big money though, you're going to want to raid, and the most profitable by far is the Chambers of Xeric, because even with boosted drop rates, we don't get enough Arcane or Dex Prayer Scrolls for everyone in time for the final, and you know, sometimes we forget just how good these items are because of how cheap they are in the main game. Even though the two of the most common items that you can get from here, they're worth over 100 million GP each, all the way until the end of the tournament, with the first ones being worth even more. And that doesn't even include things like Ancestrals, which are also massive, Dragon Claws, Kodai, and Twisted Buckler. Whilst the other raids do have some good drops, they just don't have as many good ones for PvP, and the VLS is also far superior to both the Rapier and the Fang. The downside though is there's absolutely no requirements to come here, so PKs just camp here the entire tournament. The only good news is that there's not tons of them here because they do compete against each other, so there tends to be just a few hopping between worlds. But that being said, if you are decent at PvP, don't let that put you off, especially because you can massively reduce your risk here now that there's a bank inside the raid. That means you can use the Sigil of the Guardian Angel, which will protect your entire bank if you die, which means you're just risking what you've got on you. You can then turn up and de-hide a Mystics to start your raid and then swap your gear inside. Then if you get PK'd, you're not risking much at all, apart from realistically the Sigil, which is quite expensive and consumed on death, and last time I think from memory it cost about 10 to 20 million. Finally is the Breaches, and they're the only place this time where you can get Ancient Warrior equipment. Plus, there's a bunch of other important changes. You can no longer kill the bosses in multi if you're under the effects of a 1-hour protection that you get every time you go up a combat bracket, stopping players from deliberately moving up just before a breach is about to happen so no one can kill them. Also, the Enchanted Ruby Bolt proc's not going to work on any of the bosses, and they may also have some new mechanics that they don't usually have in the main game, and there's no information yet on what that's going to be, which is going to make it really fun for the first breach for sure. With all those changes, is it worth doing? Well, absolutely. It's probably the easiest way to make money in Deadman, and whilst the risk of dying is quite high, just play it smart. Go in a team if you can and don't risk much. Use your safety deposit box for anything of high value in your bank so you're not risking it. And if after that your bank is still worth a lot, sell it and trade the money to 07. It's not against the rules, and you can always buy the GP back later if you want to when the exchange rate's better anyway. In fact, you may even make money doing it. If you're fairly new to PKing and you just want to try it out, I recommend staying in brackets 1 or 2 this Deadman. The mage and range sigils that we get at the start have been buffed this year and are incredibly powerful at that level. With Menace and Mage, any magic attack has a 20% chance to deal 18 damage, and it also heals you for 18 over 6 seconds as well. Now, most magic weapons are 5 ticks, but there are a few 4 tick ones out there, or you can use the new sigil, the Sigil of Arcane Swiftness, which speeds up any magic weapon over 4 ticks by 1 tick. So with a 4-tick weapon, that sigil alone, before you even add in your regular damage from the spell, will be doing just under 1.5 damage per second and healing you for the same amount. The ranged sigil, Ruthless Ranger, is very similar, but instead of healing you, it does even more damage. It's got a 10% chance every attack to deal 15 damage over 6 seconds, but that doubles if your opponent has no run energy, and every successful attack drains their run energy by 30. Obviously, with that, you want a fast hitting weapon, so with knives or darts before very long, you're going to be dealing up to 2.5 damage per second. It's going to be a little bit less than that just because it only works on successful attacks and the procs don't stack, so you can only have one active at any time. But again, even still, that's just the damage from the sigil. It doesn't include the damage from the knives that you're doing as well. So as you can imagine, with low health in brackets 1 and brackets 2, it's going to be an absolute slaughterfest and honestly completely unbearable trying to skill. You're not even going to need to be good at PK just to do this method. You can just farm anyone in this bracket because it's going to be so hard to escape someone doing that kind of damage. Your opponent's going to be constantly eating and just unable to do much at all. And if you run into a better PK, what are you really risking anyway? A little bit of D-hide and some knives or darts. So as long as someone's far enough away from a safe zone, there's not a lot the average player can do against this method. And these are the best places to catch what will mainly be essentially bots here. Tannin Hides and Al-Kharid, especially early on, is realistically the only place to do it efficiently because of powerful sigils that automatically bank resources when woodcutting, mining, fishing or farming. Means early on bots will try and cash in on this and will be in most locations, although you'll probably have more luck going to the out of the way ones. Places such as the fishing spots at Musa Point, just by the Myths Guild, Land's End, or they may even end up getting the fishing level up so they can go in the fishing guild and feel pretty safe in there. For mining, places like Ardy Sewers, Cantorum, Dorgish Khan, or the Evil Chicken's Lair, you're probably going to get skillers out the way trying to hide away. Woodcutting's slightly different. You really want to target players making planks because they need a large cash stack to do it, and they can't do it in a safe zone. The Sigil of Woodcraft alongside the banking and triple gathering one sends 3 planks back to the bank instead of logs if you're not in a safe zone and you have the money to do it. It's very hard to catch players doing oaks because of how many there are in the game and in so many different places, but there are only so many places you can get mahogany and teak planks from. If you catch anyone at one of these places, it's highly likely that they're going to be risking a lot of money here. Whilst there's a lot of farm and patches, to get fast experience, most players are going to use one of the allotment patches. They're all just far enough away from a safe zone that anyone without plenty of food isn't going to make it back, just by simply ragging the hell out of them, and that's what I expect bracket 1 and 2 to be, an absolute ragfest. Everyone just running around throwing knives and darts at absolutely anyone because it's just too OP. For good PKs, but ones that probably wouldn't consider themselves to be the best, I recommend a completely different route if your aim is to make bank. I think most PKs in high brackets will target players at Slayer creatures, bosses, any players tempted by the triple resources that you can get from the likes of Wintertod, Temperos and the Guardians of the Rift, plus all of the skill and locations I mentioned earlier, and that is a viable strategy. You will get plenty of kills that way, but none of them will be really massive keys. You could instead do some quest chains to open up some areas PVMers are hiding away in, but that takes a long time just to catch a few players who inevitably just never come back. Instead, what I would do is I recommend doing something in a PK hotspot instead. For example, if you did Slayer, I can guarantee that you're going to have 3 or 4 PKs showing up wanting to fight you every single task, all presuming that you're a PVMer that just can't fight back. You'll be leveling your combat stats really quickly and will be likely a higher combat level than those trying to attack you, especially for the first few days. Plus, Slayer is one of the most profitable things that you can do in this game mode, so from the drops you can afford the best gear currently available. If you're good enough, you'll make a ton of money through Slayer alone. Whips, tridents, occults and so on will always sell for a good amount, plus any PKs you kill, and there's going to be plenty of PVMs you'll come across that naturally presume that you're not going to attack them. Revs are similar and much better money early on than Slayer. However, there's almost no one going to the Revs in Deadman that isn't a half decent PK, so I'd only really recommend that strategy if you're kind of in the top 10% of PKs. Another strategy to do is to catch players doing quests. It is lame, but it's extremely effective for a lot of kills. The experience we get from things like the Waterfall and Monkey Madness quest is just too good to turn down, but a lot of players make the mistake of going too late to them instead of going straight away when you have protection and no one's really geared or ready to PK yet. In the waterfall quest, you can't take any combat items to this area here, and anything you drop appears on the ground for others to see and to pick up, forcing you to take nothing apart from a little bit of food and some runes needed for the quest. Plus here there's also a mine just to the north, and it's the start of the Dwarf Cannon quest where you can catch other players too. And in Monkey Badness, when you get caught and put in the cage, it's almost impossible to escape a PK who's waiting here with full supplies. Also at the end of the cave, most players will have very limited supplies by the time they reach the end of it when they're going to get the Gree. Now the best PKs are going to make bank absolutely regardless, but these are the most sought after spots in Deadman that the top PKs will be fighting over. Outside the Chambers of Xeric is probably number one. It's full of PVMers with a lot of risk. Of course that's the same for any raid, but the items for this one are just more in demand. There's also a lot of competition for teleport spots like Edgeville once glories come into the game, as the nearest safe spot from here is all the way in the Grand Exchange. There'll usually be someone at Berthorpe too trying to catch players on their way into the Warriors Guild, and that's because there's no safety deposit box in there, forcing players to bring the corrupted safe out with them. Most players have the house in Rimington, so outside the house portal here, which is very far from a safe zone, plus the portal has a delay when entering when in combat, so usually there's a top PK here too. Zora is another place because after every kill you have to teleport out to start again, and it puts you quite far away from the boat where you have to start the next encounter. The Wilderness Altar is the main place to train prayer as well for the first few days, so it's a massive spot if you can take over it. If you're planning to make a small team, even a group of 3 or 4 players new to PvP should make a good amount of money in Deadman. There's just so many multi-combat places people have to go, where if you catch them it's almost impossible to escape. Draenor Village Amulet of Glory teleport spot is a commonly used teleport straight to a multi-combat area. It's lame as killing people AFK at rock crowds, but it's multi-combat and essentially a free meal. Whilst it's very hard to kill people at Barrows and it's single combat, before teletabs come into the game, a lot of players will go through the swamp and use the boat to get there, which is multi-combat. They absolutely won't be expecting it either, and it's just one small area in the whole of the swamp just by the boat, and the rest is single combat. Porthos Dungeon's another multi-combat area. People go for Slayer to kill the dragons, use a safer altar later on, kill Serapnus or use grubby keys. Koren Catacombs is the same and a big Slayer hotspot, plus if anyone's in combat they can't instantly teleport away, so if you do catch anyone here they're pretty much dead. A new area this year that not many people will have realised is going to be Ralos Rise in Varlamore, where the whole area is multi-combat and people will be hoping to train prayer sneakily here in the hope that most players forget about it. Whilst as a small team you have to worry about bigger teams coming along, the bigger teams tend to have better places to go, such as the Undead Pirates at the Chaos Temple, a new update with tons of useful drops that will almost certainly be taken over by clans early on, either to PK or even farm the pirates themselves. God Wars Dungeon will eventually be taken over by clans at some point, although normally further into the tournament, usually starting in the lower brackets first, plus the same happens at most of the multi-combat wilderness bosses. They did also used to camp the Corporal Beast as well, but that was when we had 1v1s and the Ellie was just so powerful in that setup, so I'm not completely sure if they still do that. Only the absolute best clans out there will get the best spots, which is the Chinning and Mage training areas, like the Monkey Madness caves, where they're going to charge players just to come here. And people will pay it because of the massive experience you get here, plus the amount of money you make back from sigils. A lot of the time you can even make a profit. So according to the information in Deadman Reborn, which wasn't changed for Apocalypse, there's a 50-50 chance to get a sigil when you hit the drop table, and the tier of that sigil depends on what bracket that you're in. Now, while some tier 2 sigils will be good money this year, such as the 3 new ones that make combat styles over 4 ticks in speed 1 tick faster. Usually though, tier 3 sigils are worth the most, and you can only get those in bracket 4 or more commonly in 5. This graph shows you the likelihood of getting each sigil in each combat bracket. The first place you can do this that I don't expect PKers to check is the Sophanum Dungeon. It's full of traps, various levels and a ton of different ways to go. No one actually knows it very well, we just follow the line during the quest that quest helper tells us to do, like a good little boy, and we never go back to this awful place. Within here though are some Scarab Mages and Locust Riders that can easily be farmed for sigils, out of the way down one of the dead ends during Deadman. The likelihood of a PK going through all of those traps in every single corridor you would think is pretty small. Another place that would be a pain for PKs to check and very easy to escape is the Stronghold of Security. Going through almost every single door on every level would be about as much fun as watching England in the Euros. Then even if someone found you, the two doors close to each other make it a simple escape, going back and forth through both of them until you can finally tele away. As an added bonus, the first floor is also multi-combat, and higher up there's also Ankus here that you can safe spot too. Another multi-spot that you may get away with is the hills above the gate on a patrol, where you can find monkey archers. The only players likely to be in this area are those doing monkey madness, so you would like to think you're not going to get spotted very often. There's a few other good spots in this area too. You can go to the basement of the main building and kill zombie monkeys, because there's a room right at the back that we don't normally go into and has around 20 in there, which are also multi-combat. Sadly though, they have a very small aggro range, so you can only barrage 5 or 6 at a time, but very few people realise that this place is here. Upstairs is also some monkey guards that are combat level 167 with just 130 health. Because of their level, they'll roll a sigil drop 1 in every 75 kills, making this one of the fastest ways to get them outside of barraging. Mauritania's Spider Nest is another rarely used multi-combat area, and there's a few rune items you can get as a drop, plus herbs, runes and seeds, and they're very weak to magic and melee. It's quite hard to get a large clump of these together, but again you can barrage around 5 or 6 at a time. You're also going to need anti-venom for this one, but you can get them from supply drops, so they shouldn't be too expensive on the GE. And these also drop hard clue scrolls if you're looking for somewhere out of the way to farm them quickly. The Shiloh Village quest auto unlocks in bracket 5, or you can do it manually before then, and that gives you access to the cave near the Crown fishing spot. There is a health drain within here, but one of the health regen sigils will completely counter that, and it's a spot I'd be very surprised if many players checked, and it has some level 61 skeletons and 68 zombies down here. Just to the south, completing the Legends quest fully or partially means you can access the Karazi Jungle Cave, where at the very back is a bunch of lesser demons, level 82, and as we all know, weak to pretty much everything. The Shade Catacombs is another area very difficult to PK someone in. To access it, you need to kill Shades to get a key, then Shades to get a higher key, and so on until you can access the last room. In here are Urium Shades, which are combat level 140 and literally weak to every single combat style. And even if a PK came, freezing and just walking through any one of these doors would be the easiest escape of your life. The only thing that makes me a little bit wary of this spot is that it's got a bit of a unique drop table where you only ever get Shade Remains. It still should drop sigils, but if you do this method and you go a few hundred dry without a single supply or sigil drop, I would consider it a different area. If it does work though, it's probably one of the best places to do it. Every year I see players in the Troll Stronghold killing the generals. I'm not a massive fan of this, but it does have a few benefits. They're weak to range, so they can easily be safe spotted, which means if you do see a PK coming, you can instantly teleport away. In Deadman, you can't teleport when you've been in combat for the last 5 seconds, but that only accounts if you've been hit yourself. So safe spotting doesn't stop you from teleporting away. It's viable, but most of the other methods that I'm showing you can be done AFK, and this one can't unless you're going to be in combat, and there's too many people checking, in my opinion, to do that. So I think whatever method you choose, it's better just to kill something AFK with low risk, and if someone finds you, it's no big deal. A better method in this area, in my opinion, is the cave by the Icy Gate, which contains a ton of ice trolls, and all of them are aggressive towards you and combat level 120 or higher, with just 90 health, and again, weak to everything. Positioning yourself at the top will allow you to see anyone coming in, so you only really have to worry about players logging in next to you. It's a cave, so there's always going to be tons of places to freeze and log out, plus there's an exit to the cave next to you that you can escape by entering and leaving, and using the exit also takes you to another place where you can farm sigils. Outside this is Ice Wolves, and whilst there aren't many, they have a pretty large aggro range, so even AFK you end up in combat a lot. These have got really low defense and 70 hit points, but the main reason to consider this one is if you bring a wax sled, you can escape down this slope, and it's very unlikely any PK will have one of those to follow and attack you. Even if they did, unless they teleblocked you, the animation takes so long, you'll be able to teleport instantly at the end of it anyway. A very safe method is to range on Intrana. Now usually you can't take any weapons or armor here, but there are ways around it. With the fletching level, you can take logs and bowstrings to make bows, or crossbow limbs and string to make crossbows. You can also bring the D-hide, snakeskin or leather armor to craft whilst you're there, by just bringing in some leather, a needle and some thread. In the dungeon here are some level 92 greater demons, and with a new healing sigil, you should be able to AFK here once you have a decent combat level. Plus, as a bonus, anyone turning up here without gear and doing the quest is an absolutely free kill. At the very bottom of the underground pass, near to where you get the food from the dwarves, there's tons of level 39 spiders that will be aggressive towards you up to level 78. You can completely AFK and kill these here, and it's going to take a seriously dedicated PK to do the underground pass just to check if anyone's here. The healing sigils we have this year also mean you shouldn't need to bring any prayer potions or food and can simply stay until you get a sigil worth a decent amount. Below White Wolf Mountain, through a maze of ladders, you will end up with the Ice Queen that is combat level 111 and also guarded by 6 Ice Warriors. This tiny little area here is actually multi-combat and everything is close together, so you are able to barrage them all. The downside is that you will have the odd person coming here for the ice gloves, even though everything that requires ice gloves can either be bypassed or is used in a quest that auto-completes. There's always going to be people trying different strategies, and I expect the odd person to be here.